This is about 1.5 inches down from the top. There's something a little bit difficult about drawing the cylinder because you have to draw the top, the oval at the top right here of the cylinder. You got to draw that freehand. So mine is by no means perfect, but and I don't expect anybody's to be perfect. Maybe you will get it perfect, but there's no such thing as perfect anyway. So I want you to draw an oval, and I like to kind of use my elbow and kind of swing my hand like this right at my elbow, and very lightly just lower the tip of your pencil down onto your paper as you kind of go in an elliptical motion like this. Okay, so draw a couple lines there, and then when you find some ones that you like, I want you to kind of start darkening them up a little bit so they stand out more than the others. You might have to change like a couple things, a couple angles here and there. You want both ends of the oval to be kind of similar. So if it's kind of like a slightly pointy end, not pointy, but you know, it's still got to have a little curve to it. Just let them match each other. This curve here, you want that to be the same curve on the bottom of the oval. Like that. So I want you to erase any other lines now that you will not be using. Okay. So what I don't want you to do is have this. Have a curve on one side and then have a very flat bottom to your oval. So try to have more like a rice shape. It could be a little bit more open than that. It could be a little bit more, it could be a little wider than that. It could be more of an almond shape, rice shape, almond shape. You see how this one kind of has a flatter end? So just try to make it a little rounder. Alright, when you get the oval to the point where you're kind of happy with it, I want you to draw a dot on the very right hand side and the very left hand side, like this. Okay, so I have those two dots on the left and on the right. Let me just make them a little bit more visible. Like that. From those two dots, I want you to drop a line straight down. Two vertical lines that are parallel to the edge of the paper. So hover over like that. Okay. Come straight down and be parallel to the first line that you drew. So those are like the two sides of your cylinder. We need to figure out a way to draw this exact bottom curve here, just the bottom of this oval we drew at the top, down here, kind of like this, in a more exact way. I mean, we could just kind of try to, you know, make something up that looks convincing. Let's make this a cylinder about, we'll make it about 3 inches. Okay, so we'll just make it here, 3 inches long. Then over here, we'll make that 3 inches on this side and just put a little dot there at the 3-inch mark. Okay. So everything below that 3-inch mark is erased. So we have a dot here. So this is 3 inches, this length right here. Okay, and this is 3 inches too. So if that's 3 inches, I want you to create maybe four points along this bottom curve here. And from those points, I want you to measure 3 inches down on the ruler and draw a little dot. Okay, you see what I'm doing now? Move your ruler over, try to keep it parallel to the side, to this line here on the side, and put another dot at 3 inches. Move it over here, line that up at 0, and then make a little dot at 3 inches here. So you see that? Now you get like a nice little curve if you connect the dots. So that's how you can basically transfer this curve onto this area down below. so that you have a parallel curve. Okay, so now we have that. I just wanted to lighten up the little dots. They're kind of distracting. So now let's think about what direction the light source is from. I feel like the right side. So if the light source is on the upper right, you know the shadow is going to fall in the opposite direction, which is the lower left. So right underneath our light source right here, somewhere near the edge of the paper, I want you to draw a little dot, and let's call that vanishing point 1. Okay? That dot and this dot, I want you to line that up with the ruler. This dot at the end of the side of the can. And I want you to draw a line straight towards you. Diagonally towards you, like that. Same thing with this dot here on the other side of the can. Line that up with vanishing point 1 and extend a line outward. And for this shadow, what we're going to do is we're not going to draw the top of that at all. We are going to just draw, have it go off the paper and just have it fade away, okay? The top of a cylinder, the shadow of a cylinder is shaped like a rectangle. That's how it looks. But here, let's do something different. Let's just kind of have it fade and have the shadow be super long because this light source is really close to the horizon. Let's just say it's like around sunset. All right. So when we shade, we're going to use a really, really dark pencil, like a 6B pencil. Here's a 6B pencil here. Make sure that you sharpen it. And right near the base of our cylinder, you're going to make those little randomized squiggle lines like that, but they're going to be so close together. It's going to be really hard to see any little white spaces because this is the darkest part of our cast shadow. So you're going to have it go from dark to light. So if you wanted the sgraffito, this is a cylinder, and you're using sgraffito. Okay, period 8. Okay, so if you're using sgraffito, how do you get lighter and lighter with this mark making technique, with this shading technique? How do you get lighter and lighter? We can make the little sgraffito squiggles bigger, and then things should start looking lighter because you see more of the paper, the white of the paper through the spaces, right? What's another way you could get lighter and lighter using sgraffito? You could switch up pencils, right? So you could go from a darker pencil to a lighter or harder pencil. That's another way of thinking about it. But to jump from 6B to H is not a good idea. You might want to jump from a 6B to a 4B because that's only 2 steps lower. Even a 6B to a 2B is a little bit of a jump. If you don't have a 4B, you could just use a 6B, and you could also use less pressure. So, you could just stick with the same pencil and don't press down as hard on the tip of the pencil. And that will also make a lighter mark. So there's some you see how it's starting to get lighter and lighter even with the one 6B pencil. So if you wanted to stick with the one pencil, or if that's the only thing you had, you could just stick with a high number B pencil and just switch up the spaces between your squiggle marks, the pressure, and that will give you what you need. Okay? The one thing about this is it's a very textural mark, so it's going to look like a soup can covered with a very tightly textured carpet. Like if you ever saw Berber carpet, they use that kind of carpeting. It's really low, and it just has a really tight kind of weave. It's used in offices and public buildings a lot. It's expensive though. It's called Berber, and it's just got like a really tight kind of squiggly woven pattern. It's very low, and it's not very heavy. It's not very hairy. Like it doesn't have like long hairs on that carpet. It's kind of like curly. So this is how you're going to do the shading. The top is going to be the lightest. It's overall going to have a lighter value than the side here of the can. This side is going to be your light side, and this, if we were to think about this as light and dark halves, this side is your light half. This side away from your light source is your dark half, okay? But we can't just like make this white here, because we don't want to just depend on this line to show our form. So I do want you to create a little skinny stripe of very, very, very light gray there with this graffito. With this graffito, just fill that in. Okay? Then you're going to have a highlight, and that's going to be even lighter. You can either leave that white, or you can, if that looks kind of weird to you, to just like have it just be blank, just take a really hard pencil and just put the lightest amount of pressure and make your squiggles really, really big, and just barely put down any marks there. That could be lighter. Just make sure that the one on the right is just a tiny bit darker so that it looks different. So this is so that you see how that makes this outline here that we drew for the outside of the can, it hides it a little bit because it distracts from your seeing it. So I want you to put a little bit of shading there. And then this is going to be an area of mid-tone in here. So that's like your mid-tone area, or the lighter mid-tones. Over here, you're going to have, we can make that a little bit bigger, but over here you can have your core shadow. So this is your CS, core shadow. Over here, you're going to have your darker midtones. And then over here, you have like a light gray, but it should be darker than this gray right over here. So that's your reflected light. That's your reflected light. Okay. So there's like, within each of these little striped areas, there's a different value going on. And then over here, it's just going to be light gray. Okay, so Art 1s, I want you to work on the shadow. Don't worry about this yet. I would work on the shadow, and then I would do the core shadow here, which is going to be pretty dark. I would use a 4B pencil for that. I wouldn't make it as tight as the darkest part of my shadow, but I would make this value pretty dark, pretty strong. Leave a little bit more white showing though, and fill in this whole stripe area with some sgraffito. So it's an interesting textural kind of shading technique, and I want you to explore that. So I want you to fill in the top. Remember, sgraffito looks kind of like these like random squiggles. You want to keep, if you want to have them look a little neater, you can keep them kind of medium in tight, you know, instead of super loose, or you can make them loose. I might still want to go and lighten up my outline because that seems to be a little overly strong. So I might lighten that up a little bit. Or I might want to make my squiggles, that value a little bit darker so that it hides this outline over here. But let's go ahead and put some very light value on the top of that cylinder, okay? And with the R2s, with your color, you can just take your colored pencil if you want and just put in your squiggles very, very lightly using light pressure. And to get the really thin lines, R2s are going to have to sharpen their colored pencils carefully and do that often. So that's why I think just having a plain old good handheld sharpener, like a really nice sharp one, like a metal one or something like that, would be a good thing, because the electric ones will just, many times you think that they sharpen your pencil, but then the point just falls off, or they just grind it down to nothing. All right, so that's it. It didn't take me too long, so I just threw some value on there. You don't want to smudge it or anything because you want to see the distinct line. Now, even with this, You see how this side here, I would say the upper right hand side is closer to the light source, right? Because the sun is right there. That means the opposite side, which is here, this lower left half, should appear a little darker. Even on the top of the can or the cylinder, you should have transitions in tone, because that is a distance there. There is going to be a change in lighting. So over here, I want you to take the same squiggles and do another layer along this edge and kind of fade it off to the right, you know, as you're getting closer to the light source. Just make this edge a little bit darker to create transitions in tone just by layering more on top, just more. You can even follow along this little edge here a little bit, create a tiny, like a little crescent moon shape. You know, to show that the lighting situation does change as you get further and further away from the light source. And that will absolutely happen here, and it will make it look more three-dimensional because it'll be more realistic. Okay, you could just make it a little bit, just a tiny bit darker right along this edge to hide the line. What's that? Outline. Remember, outlines are evil in this class. Evil outlines. You don't want outlines right now. So it's starting to get a little darker, right? And now you kind of get a sense, you should start feeling like the top of that isn't like a big hump, like the top of a cupcake when you take it out of the oven. You know how it has that little poof? It should look kind of like it's getting a little flatter looking because of the transitions in tone. Maybe I'll make it like a little medium value area right here, little medium value area, and over here is definitely going to be slightly stronger. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that because I don't want to make it overly dark and get carried away. So right around here, this is going to be a very light area, but I want to hide this line. Okay, so what you can do is you can lighten it up by erasing it. Oop. But then I can't see it at all, so I'm going to have to put it back in very, very slightly. You're going to have an area of a little bit of value right here, just a little bit of value. You see how when I erased it, that part of the cylinder just disappeared. So we're going to have a little bit of shading on there with this graffito, just coming around the edge, around the, you know, around the from the back. So just put a little bit of graffito in there, just very, very lightly. It could be similar to this. Okay, then there's going to be an area right in here. Okay, that area is going to look almost white. I just want you to use the very lightest pressure and use some big graffito lines, some big loose lines, like it's going to look like wire that is stretched out a little bit more. Okay, and that's it. That's all you need. So that's going to appear lighter. Okay, and if we need to go back in and make certain parts darker to differentiate, okay, we will do that. Now you're going to have an area here of light middle. This is going to be light middle tone. I'm going to just point to it here. So that's going to be light mid tones. Okay, and you could have one or two light mid tones there. Just because I drew one stripe doesn't mean you know, it has to be one. You could have a couple if you want. This is going to be your highlight, the lightest. And then right over here is going to be a very I can't say that's not the highlight, but very light value to show edge to show the edge, okay? And then over here, right over here, okay, I'm just making a squiggly line because it's kind of gonna look like that with the Sgraffito. This is going to be your core shadow. So this is where you can get really much darker right in here. And then you're gonna have your area of reflected light here. But you know what? I think we need a core shadow and then we need a middle. We call this the light midtones. Let's call this the dark midtones. And then over here, right here, this is going to be your reflected light. I kind of put on the sphere drawing to not put the words because I didn't want that to detract from the drawing. But you know what, if you wrote some notes, that's fine. I feel like that would help you to write the notes. I'll take the drawing with the notes. It's fine, you know, because this is just an exercise anyway, and you should write some notes to help you remember. So let's make the core shadow dark. So choose a dark pencil. That's a colored pencil. I'm going to choose something like a 4B or a 6B. Maybe not a 9B. I'm afraid to go that dark because I don't want to compete with my shadow. So I'm going to use this. Okay, Drew. So thank you for letting me know. That's a 4B. So I'm going to use that in my core shadow. That way I can kind of control how light or dark everything else is compared to this dark value. So let's go ahead and put the core shadow in. Okay. And just keep it lighter than this. Whatever you do, just keep it a little bit lighter than that. It's always easier to go a little lighter and then add more than to use your eraser, because when you do the eraser, it kind of creates smudges and smears, and sometimes they don't go away with the B pencils, because B pencils are just very, very strong values, and they don't completely erase sometimes when you press very hard. Okay, so I need to, oh, hold on. Oh, I put the wrong thing. I made that my core shadow. Shoot. I was just talking about erasing, now I did it myself. Unfair. I hope you didn't make my mistake. I hope you were like, what's she doing? You told us not to. Okay. That's gonna have to be my dark midtones. Sorry, ladies. The darkest value here, your core shadow, should be 1, 2, the third one in from the left side. You guys are just gonna stay quiet and let me just screw up like that. I know, because I don't know. You don't want to say anything, I know. You're like, it's the morning, leave us alone. Okay. So I think that with the light midtones, I'm definitely going to split that up and maybe have a couple, like at least 2, just at least have 2. And with the cylinder, you can actually have these distinct stripes. If you don't like how that looks, it is a little harder, but you can have the Sgraffito blend into the next area along the edges. You could do that to give it a more smooth appearance or a smoother transition. But when you shade something and it has these kind of distinct stripes, what that does for you is it makes the can look like it's made of metal. But this has that kind of confusing, hairy kind of texture to it. But it'll still look like it has a lot of contrast and like that of a metal can. If you look at a soup can and you strip the label off of it, you'll see that the reflections in it are just these dark and light areas of value. that look like stripes. And it's what makes metal look like metal. I don't know if you understand that, but when you do it, you'll get it. If you ever draw something that's metal, it's entirely composed of contrasted values, like really dark areas of value right next to really light areas of value. And that's what causes that shiny metallic look. Okay? Now for my dark midtones, I can just stick with the 4B. I don't have to switch it up. And then I just press a little harder. But I need to make sure that this looks different from this little darker thing going on over here that I did with my transitions in tone up at the top of the can. So I need to make that darker, but I need to make it look different from the core shadow. So you gotta kind of vary your pressure to that degree so it looks different.
Is it darker or lighter than the core shadow?
It is lighter because it's considered a mid-tone, but it is definitely darker than the mid-tones that are going to be on the other side of the core shadow. So the answer is lighter. It's like a medium dark. And then over here, I think I'm going to have to switch pencils to something a little bit lighter than a 4B, maybe a 2B. So here we have a 2B, and I'm going to do the reflected light area. The reflected light area is kind of like it's like a highlight area on the darker side of an object. And like I said before, Mr. Marchetti calls it the dirty light. It's the dirty light because you do see the shaded kind of values in there, and it's just the light bouncing off the table and reflecting back up into the object. Something like that. So it's getting there. My problem is I might have to do something about this. Either make these values slightly darker or make this a little bit lighter up here. Maybe I went a little strong. Although I don't want to change this, maybe I need to go a little darker here to separate top from the side, because I don't want them to all look like the same thing. And yeah, this straight line does indicate an angle change, but you do need to show that with value too. And it should be obvious just even with value how dark you shade. Just by itself, you should show a value change. So maybe I need to go a little stronger here, even for my reflected light area. Or maybe I could do a little bit of a transition from a little darker up here, just to separate it from the top. There we go. And then just kind of fade it a little bit. Just create a little bit of a transition, even going down on the side here. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to work on your light midtones and finish that up. Maybe do at least 2 in here. So maybe I'll split that up into 2. Because I want to start getting into a medium light value. So here's a 2B. Okay, and I'm just going to use the 2B to do this graffito right here. And I'm going to keep my coils kind of like a medium tightness. Not as tight as next door, but like a little bit looser, a tiny bit looser. And maybe I won't go over it in as many layers, so don't go over the same area repeatedly, or it might get too dark. And I'm not using really hard pressure. I'm just using medium pressure. Okay, I'm seeing here that there is a difference. It is lighter. Maybe up here it's not as light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my kneaded pencil and I'm just going to pat it like this. Just lighten it up by patting. And patting, just patting it down and lifting it up. The kneaded eraser is kind of sticky, so it will stick to some of the pencil lead and bring it up. So that's going to be my medium. It's got to be a little bit lighter than this one over here, which is the dark midtones. So this is the light midtones. I'm looking over here, and I could probably stand to make this one a little darker, but I think it still looks, overall, this does look darker than this. It does look darker than this. And if I feel like it's not dark enough, I could go back in with a 4B pencil and I could just make this here, just put another little layer of coils, just making sure it doesn't compete with the core shadow. And just to make it more obvious, I could put a couple more coils throughout here, the dark midtones, and make that look different. Okay, like that. Now that definitely looks different. Okay, so now I'm going to get even lighter. So from a 2B, I'm going to switch to a B. If I can find just a regular B pencil or an HB pencil. Oh, I have an HB pencil here. That's like the same as a number 2 test pencil. So I'm going to keep my marks real loose and just press a tiny bit harder than I did for the highlight. The highlight is this really light area where my Sgraffito was very loose, and also I used barely any pressure. So Sgraffito here, and we'll be done this cylinder right here on the actual cylinder in a minute. So you should be following along so that you don't have to do this on another time. So I'm kind of building in class time to do it. So definitely do this during class and get it done and over with. So I'm looking here. Do I feel like this area right here that I just drew with the Sgraffito is significantly different than this? I think so. I think it's different enough. Is this highlight a little bit too light? It's a highlight, so if it's a real strong highlight, you could leave it that light. If you want, you can lighten up on this, but then I would be a little bit afraid that I would lose the edge of my can over here. So my solution would be to take my really hard H pencil and maybe just put a couple more really loose Sgraffito lines in here so that it looks a little bit smoother, the transition between this and this. But we should keep that pretty light. So that's up to you. If you want to leave it looking as light as it was before, that's fine. If you wanted to make it look a little bit more blended, you could just sneak in a couple more Sgraffito lines. So that is the end of the cylinder. The only thing that bothers me is this line right over here. I feel like that's a little too strong. Maybe I'll lighten it up and just like that, do that. And then let's work on the shadow and finish the shadow. So the shadow, I used a 9B or a 6B, something really, really dark for the umbra. So keep your little Sgraffito coils real tight, especially right underneath your object here. Okay, and then as you go out, you're going to fade, and the shadow is off the paper somewhere. The shadow ends off the paper, so you don't have to draw the top of it. The top of a cylinder shadow is going to just look like it's just going to be flat. It's going to have the same type of shadow as a rectangular prism or a box. It's not going to be rounded or anything like that. The shadow is not going to show that. As you come outward, you could stay with the same pencil and just switch up the pressure and switch up just how loose your sgraffito coils are. But do switch up the pressure too, because that does make a difference. And just make sure you put enough pencil down right underneath the cylinder that it's very, very dark, and there's a nice sharp contrast between the actual object and the shadow that it's casting. I don't know if it was this class, maybe it was my 6th period class. Someone said, well, shouldn't we make the shadow also get slightly lighter as we go toward the right side, because the sun is on that side? And I said, yes, you could definitely do that, but then you'll have to slowly do a fade this way as well as this way. It is kind of complicated, but you've done the cube, so I don't see why you can't handle that. So if you want to, you can also slowly fade it as you go toward the left, but that's a little challenging, you know, because you're also going from dark to light in 2 different directions then. But do try to blend out that line by putting the sgraffito right over it. So I'm going to try that, and that is absolutely genius. That's what it is. But it's going to take a little bit more pencil control to fade it out this way and this way in 2 separate directions. Alright, so I want you to continue working on the shadow there, Art 1s. Alright, I think I'm almost done here. Maybe my only concern is that I'm like fading a little too light, but it doesn't matter because that's pretty far out from the actual object, so that could still be pretty believable. Okay, so my umbra looks pretty light. I think I'm satisfied with that. The top of my can over here definitely looks like it has a fairly light value, right? On the can here, we could go a little darker maybe, just so that that appears to be even lighter, so it doesn't compete with this very light edge. So this is the finished cylinder in Sgraffito.